Welcome to The Passion Pod with your host, Chris Johnson. Thanks for joining us. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the feature presentation.
Season 6, Episode 1.
Welcome back, friends. Today we traveled to sunny Los Angeles to hang out with a brand new podcaster. She's probably better known for her modeling, and it's her voice, I think, that's going to be a huge part of her journey moving forward. But fresh to music and podcasting world, welcome to the show, Gwen Singer.
Hi, what an intro. It's so nice to be here. Thank you.
Oh my God, I can't believe that we made this work. I met you yesterday.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. But I mean, God, we had to. I immediately was looking forward to it. And it was just too ironic to overlook, the day that I launched my podcast.
Yeah.
Here, and I walked to a photo shoot and there happens to be a podcast recording session, in another room. I mean, and it's so my cup of tea, like I said.
Yeah, I mean, it just made sense. I come out of a room not knowing you or why you're here. Well, I know why you're there, right?
Right.
Didn't know you had a show at all. And someone's like, oh yeah, she's doing a show. And I'm like, oh, cool. And then, yeah, here we are the next day. So
Yeah.
Who are you and what are you passionate about?
Wow. I am Gwen Singer. I'm an Instagram model, at least that's what I'm most known for. And now, of course, I'm diving into this new realm, this new chapter, and this passion project of mine, the podcast. So what am I passionate about? God, where my wild, interesting, bold decisions have led me in life, and how so what am I passionate about? Hopefully inspiring others. That's certainly what I aim to do, and there's a lot of passion there, particularly because I've worn many different hats in my life. I've been really super unhappy. I've settled. I was a sales manager for years prior to becoming an Instagram model, and I was so unhappy. And I had this little voice inside me that was like, "You're meant for more, and you can do more, and you wanted to be a journalist, and there's something there." And I quieted it, and I never listened to it. And once I finally did, and it took me time. I didn't until I was 24. I never took steps in that direction. But and even that, luckily, that is young. But luckily, I made steps toward modeling, just anything to get out of my unhappy complacency, the job that I was in. And it's kind of been this evolution now to now me actually living out my dreams, because modeling hasn't been a dream. It never was ever in my life, but it's become a vehicle so what I basically was like, I'm sick of working this terrible 9 to 5. I was really, really unhappy, not passionate about what I was doing. And, but then I finally made the decision, okay, I'm going to do what's best for me, as far as income and lifestyle. I want to be able to travel. And so becoming a digital nomad, I've been doing premium content, so essentially some version of OnlyFans for years now. And the money was great. It changed my whole life, opened all these doors for me rather than closing them. Society tells you one thing, is showing your body doing this, that, it'll close doors. And it hasn't, the world has changed so much. I haven't found that to be the case. And here I am now. It's kind of led me full circle to having the confidence to pursue what I'm actually passionate about, which is sharing my experiences and learning from other unique experiences, creators, artists, entrepreneurs, and using my platform to do something, to reach people differently, stimulate a different kind of stimulation, I guess.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think it's really cool and important to recognize that everything can be a stepping stone towards something else, right? And you don't have to be put into a box of something. Just because you were doing Instagram modeling and you were doing whatever for however many years, that doesn't mean that's who Gwen is, right? That's just what Gwen was doing during that period of time. At any point in time, you're allowed to do whatever you want. It's your life. And if you have some other passion that you want to pursue, you can do that. And it's cool that what you were doing before you gained a lot of skill and a lot of knowledge that is going to be beneficial and put you in a position where, starting a podcast is probably going to work a little bit easier right now than it would have if you started when you were 19. So,
Totally.
So how can people best follow you, see your work, and in general get in contact with you if they wanted to after this episode?
Well, the go-to place would be my website, therealgwen.com, because there's my links to everything there. But also, of course, Instagram, Gwen Singer, GwenSinger. It's a great place to check me out, as well as on Spotify, POV with Gwen. But I do want to circle back to what you just said. you're right. It's so important that we don't let anyone put us in a box. But I think more often than not, it's us putting ourselves in our own box, and that's the difficult thing to overcome mentally. And for me, that's been the case. Everyone, the podcast has been requested by my audience for quite a long time. Actually, it's been like really since I started, at all in this industry. Posting, I've always been pretty vocal for a model on my stories. I love to talk. And the response is, a lot of people asking, oh, when are you going to, I love to hear you talk, response to my voice, which is the greatest compliment to me because so much of what I'm passionate about requires me to use it. And so, I think, the world didn't put me in the box. Only person who is allowed to do that, capable of doing that is me. And for a long time, I put myself in that box. Like, oh my gosh, no one, like I'm a 2-dimensional model. They don't want this or just not having the courage to start the process. And it's taken, God, a long time. I mean, 2 years of thinking about it and like a year of talking about it. And then finally, once I started talking about it, the right people started showing interest. And then my team, Jake and Sarah, formed, and all three of us are pretty much the three launching my podcast. No one knows what we're doing. We're all figuring it out for the first time. And it's exactly how it's supposed to be for me. Like, it's just been so gorgeous, like the whole process coming together.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you have a certain image, right, that's what like followers or something, and not that they aren't valuable people, right, but they don't necessarily care about you personally, right?
Right.
So here's the key is if you want to do something, people who really care about you will want to support you because that's what makes you happy.
Right.
And that's what it comes down to. It's not about whether society's this or you've built yourself up to be a certain thing. Whatever makes you happy is what you ultimately have to go towards. And hopefully you can do that in a way that monetizes enough that you can still live a decent lifestyle, right? Because money's not important unless you don't have enough to live.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it's not really that important. You know what I mean?
Right.
And you want to be able to live your life the way that you want to live it. So, what was kind of growing up? I want to know a little bit more. Like you were in sales jobs, right? I was in sales jobs. That's probably part of the reason that we're able to talk to people.
Yeah, it certainly helps.
I sold jewelry for a while, which is part of the reason I wear a lot of gold. Right?
Yeah.
So I worked for K Jewelers, I worked for Helzberg Diamonds, and then my last real job, quote, was for Verizon. And at that point in time, I wasn't any greasier than any other salesperson, right? But cell phone sales are just kind of greasy because the companies are just kind of greasy.
Predatory.
Yeah, and I just really hated it. And at that point in time, my older one had just turned 1, and I was kind of in this like little time frame in my life where I'm like, okay, well, what's really, really important to me? And my father had a heart transplant. He almost died. And I was thinking like, well, if I died tomorrow, would I be happy with what legacy I'm leaving behind?
Right.
And I really didn't feel good about it. Not that I was doing horrible things, but I felt what I'm leaving on the table is nothing. I wouldn't be proud for my kids to read about that. And that's why I made the decision to open up a skateboard shop, because that's what I was passionate about. And it's not even about the skateboards themselves. It was about providing this community hub for the youth. And that was really important to me. So you growing up, you did sales. What made you decide to even do modeling in the first place then? How did that come up?
Gosh. Okay. So, there's like a whole story here. So, immediately after high school, I found myself, or actually my high school sweetheart, I got trapped into this really not healthy relationship, super unhealthy relationship for nearly 8 years. And during that time, I pretty much didn't really like have a social life at all, like really very few friends. In hindsight, I realized it wasn't necessarily like physiological depression, but I was really unhappy for a long time. And at the time, I just didn't realize it. And so I worked. Instead of going to college, I got into a bunch of schools, but instead I wanted to stay back with my boyfriend at the time. And I went to community college for a bit. I was going to plan to transfer to UC Berkeley. It didn't happen, of course. I got caught up working and went into management. So I got caught up working in Nordstrom, and I started working there. And I only was a sales associate, I think, like 8 months. And then I went into management. And then from that point, it's kind of school took a back seat and just focused on working and making money. And the idea at the time was, okay, I'll go work through management, work my way up to either becoming a buyer or some corporate was the goal. Eventually. And so ended up doing retail for years. And then I eventually, a couple of years later, went to Neiman Marcus and became a sales manager at Neiman Marcus. And I was like, in my early 20s, I had a team of more than 20 people. Like I had a team of 22 people at the most at once, all literally twice my age, my senior. And I learned so much in that time. There's a couple of things that happened. So my ex-boyfriend, I finally summoned the courage to leave, right around the same time, left, and 14 months later, I got a phone call. Part of what I was so terrified of, he was really not well. I was worried that he was suicidal, but he had a lot of support in his life. So, I left. 14 months later, I got a phone call from his mother that he did in fact take his life. And it was a horrifying, 3 months of intense grief. I waking up crying, going to sleep crying, very, very, very intense. But I went back to this Neiman Marcus job of, management, and it gave me the sense of mortality, and I started looking at this team differently, thinking of my life differently, and realizing you only have one, right? And so I didn't want to. I saw what complacency looked like after years of making the choice to settle, because I had several people on my team, one amazing poet, really great writer who could have done more with it, and instead, because of comfort, because of being afraid to step out of that box, is now retiring, with one job, sales associate, and has these beautiful poems that I read, and I'm like, gosh, you had something there, and that's not to say that he couldn't have done more with it on the side as well, but just it was just another example of I don't know, a reminder of my own mortality, right? And so then pretty soon thereafter, I started in a lot of ways it was a really good time for me, because there was, if I'm honest, I was no longer worrying about him. And so once the grief passed, there was a sense of oh my gosh, relief, and almost kind of this sense of appreciation that he gave me this reminder of that I only have one life. And so I actually started to live mine better. And so then, I'm unhappy in my job, and I basically found out about premium content. So essentially at the time it's private Snapchat, but it's now there's OnlyFans, there's just different versions. And I knew that, I started, anyway, I met a girl who was doing basically webcamming. It was all kind of the same realm. And she was telling me how much money she made, and I also, I think because I'd been so repressed for so long in this relationship, I was looking, I wanted to embrace my sexuality, and there's so many things. It was just, I was excited by the idea of essentially making money, and also kind of empowering myself sexually and liberating. And so I started, modeling, showing my body, and really, I never really felt like I was exploiting myself in any way. It was actually the most empowering decision I've ever made. All of a sudden I had financial freedom. All of a sudden I'm able to all of a sudden I'm getting worshipped by these, fans. And it was what I needed, or at least it really helped me at a time when I was so insecure. And it also helped because, I adopted kind of a persona. And so adopting the persona empowered me to kind of be this version of myself that I never could have been. I was I'm like, oh my gosh, so I act confident, and then I faked it until I made it. And then confidence kind of came more naturally to me over time. So the persona really helped me to find confidence, to kind of entertain. And so I, started doing that. Eventually, obviously Instagram made sense as a way to, traffic, more, subscribers. And when I started to find, I really loved it, and now it's been several years, but over time I started to realize that the kinds of compliments that make me feel good and that I actually really appreciate are the ones that don't have to do with my modeling, my looks, but they're ones that are I don't know what it is, but I really love hearing you talk. I love what you have to say. I love you, inspire me, you uplift me, you make me happy on your stories. I'm super bubbly. So, and so I started, it became pretty clear early on that I wasn't doing it really for the money. I was doing it for the lifestyle that the money afforded me. But over the years, I more and more, I realized, God, even with the podcast, there are other things I could do to chase money that would be more profitable right now. But podcast, this is the way that I want to make money. And so I'm actually taking, I only have so much energy and time, less energy toward my OnlyFans and my Instagram, the things that have been making me money, and putting it more toward this project, because this is really, again, my legacy and part of the process of transitioning away from just this 2D face to more of a voice and to more of an influence. You talk about influencers, I have 1 million followers, but we're all influencers in our life, and we're just and with different amount of reach. So I happen to have a large amount of reach, but I'm the people that I find so inspiring are those like Joe Rogan. It's not about how fucking famous you are. It's about what you decide to do with it oftentimes, or at least, when you're talking about art, that's a different thing, because you're, just by sharing your art, you're doing so much. But as even when you think about it had even come up, there's different kinds of hosts and personalities and public figures, some that polarize, that alienate the opposite, and in a lot of ways, especially when we're talking about politics. But then you have those like Joe Rogan who try to appeal to both sides, who to make an effort to remain moderate so that they're open-minded. So especially like this recent election, really, I mean, the toxicity, the partisanship, the how closed-minded, people are toward, toward that concept of being open-minded. That was a huge, that kind of pushed me, closer to this.
Do you think that by doing the OnlyFans thing and putting yourself in this position where like you're getting whatever kind of attention, and obviously like certain people are going to feel certain ways or whatever, do you think that kind of puts you in the right mindset to realize that you don't have to appease people to do the things that you want to do? And that way in turn helped you find your own voice for something like a podcast? Because it takes a certain level of confidence to record your voice telling your opinions and putting it out to the world like that.
It's a different vulnerability. I can show my whole body like for years and not think, and the different vulnerability when I shared that first episode. I mean, it's wonderfully uncomfortable for me, and has been. I'm like, oh my God, this is so uncomfortable, but it feels so liberating too, because it's been a while. I've been an influencer this long, so it's like, gosh, whoa, it's been a while since I felt, kind of like, oh my gosh, how are they going to respond and how are they going to react? So do I think it? The question: do I think that it helps to pave the way for me? 100%. Just getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, but it still didn't. And so I can only imagine the amount of comfort it would take, or confidence it would take someone who doesn't have, experience like I do with, interacting live with, followers and posting something that I know, hundreds of thousands of people are going to see, so newfound respect, I think, to those who really started with, like you did without this big audience, just with passion behind them.
Yeah. I mean, if you believe in what you're saying, right, you're not playing a moniker, then it should hopefully be a little bit easier. We talk about influence, and one thing that I think is important, you're talking about, getting certain compliments about whatever. It's important to recognize that your influence only matters if you're accomplishing something. It doesn't matter how many people hear your voice if you're not telling a message that matters to you, right? Then it's just superficial and completely irrelevant. Thankfully, by building this following, not everybody that follows you is theoretically going to care what you have to say. That's just not realistic, right? But hopefully you can get a good percentage of people to all of a sudden realize like Gwen does a lot more than this. Yeah. And then you can spread a really cool message based on, all these things that you did. And another thing that's like, is something that I really respect about doing this. It's hard to walk away from something, and it's not like you're totally walking away, but it's hard to change direction when you have something just working so comfortably, and then put yourself in, you're not starting maybe 100% from ground zero because you have a following, but you're basically starting from ground zero on something that you don't have experience in. And like, you have to have a certain level of humility to put yourself in that vulnerable of a position, because it's easy to do that when you don't have that skill and then fall flat on your face because you haven't built anything. You don't know that it's necessarily going to work. But the fact that you have the confidence and you can say, look, it's okay if this doesn't pop off and do fantastic immediately, because I believe in the vision and where it's going to go. Yeah. I want to talk about entrepreneurship, because when you build up something like being a model, I mean, even through like Instagram and the internet is like a really empowering tool that really what you are is an entrepreneur, because you're working for yourself, right? Like you're making money for yourself. You
all
don't have
artists
somebody
who are freelance, are essentially entrepreneurs. Right?
Absolutely. So how important, in your opinion, has personal branding been towards your success?
Hugely important. And I think that's what I really like. I'm like, oh, how have I really built my brand? Because essentially, like most of everything has been through Instagram for me. That's what, my whole, quote unquote empire has been built through Instagram. And I think I the way that I really kind of branded was with how I dive deep in my captions, like generally speaking, at least like for a model, I've been treating them generally speaking more like a blog over time, and trying to be as authentic as possible. It also like really like encourage critical thought, like thought provoking ideas, quotes, concepts, and so that's become, that's really kind of, I guess, how I built my brand, that plus image, so how important is it? I know that it's important, and I think I'm just now paying more attention and doing it and branding more consciously. And so, this year was the start of that. Even my vision board that I made for this year, I have like what my brand's about. I have my go-to like words that inspire me, that help me kind of stay focused and stay true to, what I most want to represent represent.
Well, I think that's the only way that you can make that transition, right? Is because you have to build a personal brand for people to really respect you. Because otherwise you're just an image, right? You're just some hot girl on the internet. But that's not the point, right? The point of actually being a true influencer is that people are listening, actually listening to the things you have to say, because you're telling a story. It's a personal brand. It's something that actually is cohesive. Right. And then when you move into something like a podcast, people aren't incredibly surprised by the way that you talk, right? Because
true.
It's actually on point, which is the reason that people are going to be able to follow and transition. And hopefully those people can transition with you to the podcast and then can transition to you with music and with any other endeavor that you do, right? Hopefully that's what the audience actually is. Can you tell me about music? I know you're singing and stuff, but like when did that come up? Were you singing before? Is this just totally new?
Okay,
when did it pop up?
So I've wanted to, I feel like I was saying when I was young, I've always loved to sing. And so like, my dreams growing up, from my earliest memories are literally me in my backyard running around singing. I just always loved to sing. And I had dreams of being a singer. I did a little bit of singing lessons, a few singing lessons when I was like young, that only for about a couple months. And unfortunately, I got a stage fright. And then this is sorry, Dad. He pulled me out of singing instead of hey, let's overcome this. He was like, hey, let's try something else. And in truth, I think that set up some bad like mental habits as far as kind of walking away from projects. When things get difficult. But I now so it's interesting now to be revisiting a childhood dream at this point. And it's taken me this long of being an influencer and having a following to have the guts to now be like, well, how about I do music? Because I've always wanted to. Why not? So it's really interesting how, that I'm like, God, it takes so much affirmation sometimes for you to finally act on your passions. Like I could do all of this and be successful with the modeling, but not really be doing what I love because I'm like, oh, I give them what they want from me. And then now I'm like, God, it takes how many years of that and validation and building this brand and getting like love and support, and it's still taken me this long to have the guts to be like, oh, wait a second, I love to sing and I'm good at it. Let's fucking do that and share it. And so now actually when you say like how important is personal brand, personal brand is so important with me more, not so much like I'm like, oh, is it so important to other people? It's personal brand is so important for me because I think of, wait a second, what is my brand about? My brand's about, it doesn't fucking matter how old you are, go pursue your dreams right now. And so I'm like, oh, wait a second, I got to lead by example there. And if I always want to make music and I'm telling people, hey, you're never too old and you're never too late and you do what you love, just fucking go for it. Well, my brand, I got to be true to my brand. And so that's when I think the whole concept of brand comes in my head where I'm like, wait a second, I'm not about that. And so even in my most recent interview with Gavin Rosdale, I was shied away from a question that I'm like, fuck, I'm like, my brand doesn't shy away from that shit. My brand attacks it and goes deep and it says, like, hey, it doesn't shy away from a personal question. Like what was it like to be part of a really public divorce? Like, how did that change you? How did that affect you? I shied away from that question, which is something that I'm really truly curious about. So I come back to, wait a second, that's not my brand. And so the brand is like kind of a good self-check more so than I think like, me thinking about it and its effect to other people. It's more about like, wait a second, how do I navigate? What would my image do? What would my persona do? And do that. So it's funny,
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a couple things there. One, I appreciate how you're giving credit to people that don't have any following to be not timid, and actually come out and do the things they want to do. I will say though, I think it's just as hard for everybody, right? Because even though you have a huge following, they don't follow you because you sing, right? So you're putting yourself out there to significantly larger audiences. When you're talking about stage fright, right? You're stepping onto a much larger stage for people to be able to potentially judge you. Right?
Okay. So that was it's so funny you say that because I was complaining about that because it's so great, podcast. I'm like, fuck. I finally started like taking steps in the direction of pursuing what I'm actually like give a shit about, and that I'm like super excited about, which is the podcast, which is conversing in general. It's my favorite fucking activity, and so I'm like, oh, so anyway, start to take the steps in pursuing that, and everything kind of starts to fall in line. And the people I have a beautiful and personal network, so reach out to and like there's no like everyone, yeah, sure, I'll come on, and I'm like everything going so well, and it's just been so encouraging. And so it was funny because Gavin Rosdale coming in on my second episode, right? And I'm like, God, this is really cool. But I'm like, this is like my third interview ever. And now I have to, I'm like, so it's like there's a catch-22 or like a kind of that's the caveat there is that I'm like, oh, now it's great to have this big name, but now I'm like, who knows if I have big ears and big eyes and I'm not ready, so it is kind of funny there. But to feel vulnerable in that way, but it's kind of like pulling the Band-Aid off.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing that I was gonna touch on, because I mean, I completely agree with you there. But the other thing I was gonna touch on is holding yourself accountable. Some people don't really understand the position that people like me or you are in. Granted, yeah, you have a significantly larger following, but anytime you're in the public eye, right? In my small town where I live, I'm in the public eye relatively largely, and therefore.
And not just there, do you have your listenership as well?
Well, absolutely, yeah. But if I all of a sudden go back on who I am, or who I, and that's why you can't fake it, right? You have to be exactly who you are. But it's kind of like a good. I feel like it's almost a good thing, right? Because you have that like pressure
holding you accountable,
to make you actually be yourself,
totally,
right?
Yeah, it actually like holds you accountable to being authentic,
right? Which unless you were in a more public position, people don't necessarily have that.
You can get away with it. I can say I'm launching my podcast on May 5th, and then I can be like, oh, but I don't need to launch, which I also honestly like, and let me tell you, thankfully, I praise my lucky stars for Jake and Sarah, my podcast team. They do a beautiful job of corralling me past the doubt, but I give them every opportunity. I'm like, so if we're not ready, I'll just say that that it's been delayed again, whatever, and they're like, no, we're doing this, like the episodes are great, just let it go. So yeah, totally, and I think a big thing though is having the right support in a team, or at least for me, that's been the case. I really don't think I could have done it, sure, without Jake and Sarah, but I don't know that I would have, or at least I certainly wouldn't have felt so great about it like I do now.
But here's the thing, right? That comes down to people that care about you. Right? Because your team, if they only cared about money, they wouldn't push you to podcasting, right? They're only helping you because they care about you. And that's why it's so important to surround yourself with people that care, because everybody, there's a lot of people out there that are just like looking, how can this person help me? Or how can, whatever. But when you can find those gems of people that genuinely care about you, those are the people to keep around, because you can build around that team. You can teach them to help you with editing if they didn't know in the past, but because they care about you, they're going to do a much better job anyways. What was it? When was this time frame? Because leading up to quarantine, everyone kind of had to change things a little bit. Instagram modeling, I know it's a little bit different because it's like one-on-one photo shoots and stuff like that. But was it during quarantine that the idea to be doing the podcast and to be moving into singing and stuff, was it during that time frame, or when did this happen?
Well, they're two separate ideas. So the podcast, gosh, if you had met me, there's parts of me that there are times I really miss my 25-year-old self. I've come a long way as far as like the ability to listen. But I used to just be I'm like, move over world, you're not going to have any room to talk. I own the floor, try, a little bit of a hog with it, just when I was socializing with my friends who luckily love me, and totally, have always enjoyed what I have to say. But I've been told I need a podcast ever since 5 years ago, because the way I talk in person, I just like to do it a lot. I'm just a conversationalist. So the podcast has been a lot longer coming. I've been thinking about it at least 5 years, and then talking about it, or at least more really planning on it 2 years. And then actually met Jake and Sarah in September, and it's taken this long to launch. So it's it's been interesting. So that's been bubbling for a while, because I've always been, even when it comes to what I do, the difference in my numbers, even sales, I get more subscribers, I make more money when I show more of myself, when I talk, when I do Q&As and questionnaires with my followers. It's always a boost in my subscribers. So I think, talking and sharing more, that is, again, how you engage and really for me, it's been my point of difference more so than the way I look, at least that's what I believe. So that has been a longer time coming. The music thing, it's funny. It's always been a dream, but I think, again, the confidence, a little bit of PTSD, my confidence being hurt as a youth in regard to singing. But I know that I have talent, do karaoke, and I'm super untrained, but always wow, you have a good voice, at least pretty good. And I'm getting a vocal coach now, and I'm so excited to work and improve, because I'm oh, fucking, I want to give me the blues, I really want to sing. But it was revisited during COVID, so early pandemic. I had no plan of it. It wasn't I wasn't talking about it or nothing. But early pandemic, I had a friend who, she's like, "Don't you like to sing? I know you had mentioned that you like to sing, and someday you want to make music." My friend needs a vocalist for some song. You hired a vocalist. He wasn't happy with how it turned out, so he can't really pay. He doesn't have a budget. But if you want a low pressure intro into in a studio and just see how it goes, it would really help him out. I was like, okay, why not? And so I go in and basically he'd given me the lyrics and he'd given me the beat prior. And he's like, so I'd come in and he's like, so you know how it goes. It's like, no. And he does it. And I was like, whoa, no, that's not how I heard it at all, but I like it. And he goes, well, how'd you hear it? And I was like, I heard it kind of like a rap. Anyways, long story short, so it went well. So I ended up doing the chorus for him, but I actually ended up doing a verse as well on it because he liked how I heard it. And so it actually became like the verse that I did actually kind of became the song the way that I had done it. And so already right off the bat, I was like, wait a second, I'm already kind of being involved with the creation process. So like I'm changing the song. And I left the studio and it only was recorded in one session. We did one little previous session when I did like 45 minutes of studio and then we got like a song out of it. It's crazy. But I walked away. I'll never forget. I even posted it. I walked out of the studio and I was like, this is the greatest feeling I've ever had in my entire life. So the podcasting is so much fun and it is still a total passion of mine and I'm exhilarated. And it's a step in the direction of what I ultimately want to do with my life, which is be more of a voice and a public figure and to like, my idols were Oprah, and so essentially like move more in that direction. But so that there's that there. But the singing, I'm like, this is something for me. And I was like, I walked out of there and I posted something on my story. I was like, yes, sex is good, but have you made a fucking song? And it was like, and that's how I felt, and that's still how I felt. And so I'm like, and even since then, my self-love, the journey to self-love, I think is lifelong, or at least for me, it's been, thus far very much so the case. And so now I'm finally paying attention to like, wait a second, I know there's still a sense of like me doing a lot of things for others, a lot of what I do, just feeling like, oh, this is like, what they want from me. But then the music, I'm like, this is for me. And so I'm excited. It just, that was just planting the seed. And then it was like, well, wait, what kind of music do I want to do? And that's just, it's a process, it turns out, because now it's been nearly a year or like, better part of 8 months, of knowing, okay, I'm going to make music, but I'm still like, I just now decided on like my 3 artists of inspiration. It's been such a process because I'm like so many different things. So it's like, just starting, just first step was accepting that there's an artist bubbling inside of me. And then I'm just seeking my medium. And then, and turns out, we all have multiple, but yeah, there's a voice in there that's, but she's, that's all, it's all starting. That's brand new. The podcast, it took this long. So maybe in a year I'll have something to share.
But what's beautiful, right? I discovered painting in the last couple of years and I never painted growing up. I don't really make money off paintings and I don't need to. I sell them for a little bit just because I don't need 1 million of my own paintings in my house, but I don't need that to be anything. Mm-hmm. It's just a creative expression that I think over time, will build into something, but because I don't need it to be anything, that's what's so refreshing.
It can be true. You don't have to, you're not compromising, you're not pandering.
Right. And there is one thing I want to comment too. When you say you're doing interviews and stuff, you're seeing more subscribers. I was talking to somebody about this, back home, and they're saying, well, why would you want to interview a model who has a big following? And I'm like, well, okay, here's the thing. If this person does indeed have a large following, it's not because she's hot. I'm sorry, but it's a
lot of things.
That's part of it, sure. But there's a lot of 10 out of 10 women. I meet them all the time. There's beautiful women everywhere.
Oh,
right?
Man, yeah.
It's not just because you're beautiful. It's not just because you did OnlyFans. It's because you're a person that people identify with, right? Yeah. And they enjoy listening to, and they want, like, that's why I think the podcast comes in kind of perfectly, because people are already kind of starving to hear more of you on that kind of level, on an intellectual kind of level. So Absolutely. Moving forward, the podcast is coming out. Episode 1 literally just dropped. I mean, we're recording this on May 7th, right before my birthday and before I fly back to Wisconsin.
Thank you, by the way.
Of course, but this isn't going to come out until probably sometime in June. So I imagine a couple more episodes of yours are going to come out. But if people, once they listen to this, all of a sudden hop on and start following things you do, follow you on Spotify, what can they kind of expect to see over the next, month, 2 months, 6 months, whatever? What's like for sure coming up with you?
I mean, there's certain to see evolution because I'm brand new. I'm really, I'm really, again, the passion pod, I've got a lot of passion for this. And so I'm listening back and I'm so excited. It'll be wonderful. The new listeners, if, whomever, transitions over, whatever, hops on over, it'll be fun for them to see, my growth and improvement, because there's certain to happen because I am such a novice and so new. So there'll be that, and they can all. I mean, and really, it's going to be a gorgeous evolution of or at least a gorgeous process of me exploring music, because I'm really acting on it now. Like last night I had a music session. I'm getting a vocal coach, Mitch, who I'm working with next week, and really like, committing myself to exploring that, again, without the intent of money, but with just the concept of finding my voice after an entire life knowing that I want to sing, and now, taking me this long to do it. So there's that, and so many other things. I mean, I'm just now, like I said, I'm just now viewing myself as an artist, and so my content is reflecting that, and all of the content that's to come. I'm really excited to incorporate what I'm doing, like basically like all together. So I want to do OnlyFans content with my own music, where I'm strip dancing to my own songs, and things like that. Also I'm writing erotica, and so like sharing more. So it's really been a process of me moving away, like kind of. I'm changing so much as a creator so quickly right now, because because I'm just so ready for change, and I'm just got nothing but this creative energy to expel. So there's so many things. I don't know where to begin.
Yeah, well, it's fun to see growth, right? When you hit a certain plateau, maybe you weren't plateauing yet within what you were doing, but at some point things get somewhat stale. Maybe not totally stale,
no,
but the
I
excitement.
just had gotten to where I wanted to be. I just gotten literally right when I'm like fucking over modeling, literally, which was right when I fucking started. Like for me, because it was never a goal for me. Like some of my friends really like, oh, really? I mean, I could work hard to get on Playboy Mexico. I could do all these things. It's all right there. I know exactly what to do it. And it really, honestly, the lot with modeling, there's a lot of people. There's a process that anyone can get these things done, right? I know how to do them, but it's not important to me. I don't give a fuck, But so it's so funny, because right when the things that I thought I cared about, when back in the day, I'm like, oh my god, I would love to be Playboy, and like I'm like, oh, it's right there. Don't really care. And not just that, but like all these models now that I'm on the radar of. So a lot of the girls that I follow and that I even have personal relationships with, even that I'm now personally friends with and have worked with, were models that I'm like, someday it would be amazing if I could shoot with her, right? And then manifestation, this shit's crazy. Like then here I am, flash forward 3 years later, they're my friends, right? And I'm like, I'm like, oh yeah, I should set up a shoot with her, but I don't care. Like I just, I'm like the thing that you think you want sometimes, right? And I will keep shooting, of course. I still love it. It's just that right now I'm so excited about these other projects, and that I'm excited for that to take a second step, take a back seat. But that's a process, and so. Yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be fun to kind of see where it goes. Being that I'm now acknowledging what's important to me, versus and not wasting time on what I know isn't.
And it's important to recognize that it's okay for that to happen, right? You had that period. Who you were yesterday isn't who you are today, which isn't who you are tomorrow. Maybe who you were a year ago to today is pretty similar, and then maybe it's drastically different in a year. But either way, it's up to you. Right. You can do whatever that you want. So you've lived in a pretty incredible life, I'm sure. You've been traveling all over. You've done a lot of different things, right? People who do anything kind of outside of the norm for their general career path, rather than just working a sales job, tend to have really unique experiences. So this is my favorite part of the show. I always like to hear at least one. I know you have a million of them, and we can always talk after the fact, but for the sake of this not going on for hours, what is one story, one experience that you can share, something specific that happened to you that you're really grateful that it happened, but it only happened because you chose this journey?
I mean, you could argue that everything that happens to me, right, is only everything good and bad is a result of me taking the steps and choosing this journey. But God, there's so many great ones. One of the more surreal experiences I had recently was I just got back from Kenya. So I just got back from Kenya. I did 3 weeks in Kenya with a friend, and we went on a camping trip, and fucking mushrooms, and the Maasai tribe is cooking for us. And the Maasai tribe is it's a really beautiful tribe in Africa, and they did this incredible chanting ceremony, and it was just out of this world beautiful. And it happened to be on the night of it was like a special moon. It was like a blood moon, so the sun and the moon were up at the same time. It was like 2 sunsets, and it was just this most magical human moment, because everyone, I was only one of the only Americans, but all different expats, Germans, French, a group of us, and they're some of the most, so a lot of them really highly educated people, Ivy League types, and I'm sitting there being like this, I'm just the Instagram model, like with the OnlyFans over here, and the only reason I was there is because of the life I've chosen, and because of basically because I just got back from this wedding in Pakistan where I'd met somebody who I then met in Kenya, so yeah, I think, being there with the Maasai tribe with this incredible group of people with such diverse perspectives, having one of these like National Geographic type experiences, and it was absolutely out of this world magical for me. And that was just the result of me. That was just something that came from another great experience. So this wedding in Pakistan. I went to this incredible royal wedding in Pakistan, weeks prior, that led me to Kenya. So it's when I say fortune favors the bold, sometimes I think like that may be the title of my book when I write it, because I've thought that to myself so many times. Every single cool experience I've ever had, it's been after I chose to say, fuck what they think, this is what I want. And then life started. The Confucius quote, which is my favorite. You have two lives, and the second one begins when you realize you only have one. And I live my life by that. I know that I have one life, and if it is a matrix, they certainly love the crazy decisions, because they've led me to really cool places.
Well, honestly, when you continue to do things that you're passionate about and you really care, you get good at them, right? People recognize that eventually. And the fun part is that I'm sure you didn't plan to do those things; they just happen, right? Mm-hmm, yeah. Versus people ask me like, how are you going out to California interviewing whoever? It just happened. Wasn't expecting to be interviewing. I didn't even know we were going to be in this house yesterday.
Yeah, no, right. I'm really impressed. It's a gorgeous house.
Yeah, but it just happened because I was putting out the right things into the world, right? I was doing something I cared about. And then when I met somebody and I had already done several interviews or whatever, and I did well, then this person wanted to introduce me to this person. And then that thing, led to whatever. And here I am, and I've been in LA all week interviewing a whole bunch of really cool people. You know what I mean? That I never really expected to. The fact that you and I were texting lining this up is going to be crazy when I'm sitting back home and I'll be like, oh yeah, Gwen, she's the homie. You know what I mean?
Totally.
And it just happened because that I was doing this. Yeah. So I always like to try to at least teach people. It's not like I know all the answers to things. However, when you stumble, you make mistakes, you learn things, and then hopefully other people can learn from those mistakes. So I like to ask that question too. Through this journey so far, what was a mistake you made, or maybe better wording it, something that you could have done differently that taught you something that somebody listening right now might be able to benefit from?
I mean, so there's two. There are really two, because, one is just a personal experience, something like a kind of a personal regret if I was to have a regret. And the other one is essentially, the one biggest thing that I kind of wish in hindsight, I wish I had more confidence in my actual skill and abilities, because it took, because I'm like, for the longest time, I'm like, oh, this is what I have to offer, is the way that I look, and downplayed what actually were my actual strengths, and everything that turns out, my skills have always been talking, and singing, and I don't know why I had such difficulty in accepting and embracing my own potential. And so, in hindsight, I wish that I didn't put so much focus on the way that I look, and that I had started off, with no following, but doing it with the podcast, just a different direction. So I guess, but that's part of self-love, which is a journey that is long I think for so many of us, and me, myself, I'm still definitely haven't arrived, but I'm getting there. So there's that, wishing that I had more confidence. And so for those of you who are like, God, I've always wanted to sing, and guess what? When I sing, people like it, and they always talk about it. People are like, oh, please do another karaoke, but I won't. Like, when what you love, you're pretty good at. Don't quiet that voice. I wish I hadn't. And I would be, I'd have albums out by now had I not, right? But that was just my path. As for personal experience, that I think I would do something different, would have done differently now, is when I first started doing the premium content, the OnlyFans stuff, and in even Instagram, I didn't tell my mom. I lied to her for a long time, and it ate away at me. And so for like about a year, I told her, I was even traveling at the time. I was like, oh yeah, I'm working for, my friend has a medical practice. So I'm like, yeah, I'm working for like remotely admin work. And because of it, I lost a year of a relationship with my mom, because I hate lying. I'm really honestly, like, it's not that I have like all this integrity. It's just that like I'm just why I hate how it feels, and so that ate away at me, and I lost a year of a relationship with her where she wasn't part of my life, because I didn't want to talk to her, because if I talk to her, then I have to lie. So I'd rather just not answer a call, just not speak to her, because I don't want to have to talk about the lie and keep it going. So I wouldn't have hidden that from her, and one of the greatest days of my life, and the greatest memories of my entire life was the day that I told my mom, and it was so beautiful. So sometimes you don't give people in your life enough credit for how progressive maybe they might be, that you don't realize. Try people, try them. And I think I would have rather her been pissed and known and and dealt with it than hid it from her and alienated her for that period. So I learned a lot there about, especially when it comes to the ones that you love. These lies build walls, and I think it's important for your own, just for how your relationship with yourself.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to be who you are, right? Yeah. You can't hide who you are, otherwise you're not going to be happy. And I'll tell you what, if you go into a party, who do you want to be around? You want to be around the person having the most fun. Yeah. They're the most attractive person in the room.
Not the person who's acting the coolest, not the person who's guarded and trying to put on the cool face.
That's exactly it. It's whoever's having the most fun, and they're having fun because they're doing the things that they enjoy. Yeah. Maybe you're not going to be good at whatever immediately. You probably won't. It takes a little while to, grow into that. Mm-hmm. But if you're really enjoying it, that really, really shows through. So now that we're coming to the end of the interview, how can people, now that they've listened and they've seen more than just your Instagram or your extra content or whatever, now that they've listened and they're like, damn, Gwen's really cool.
Yeah, you think so?
Moving forward,
I hope that's what they're thinking.
Moving forward, how can people best support you?
Best way to support me, tuning into the podcast right now, because that is my passion project. So that's that will eventually, bring in an income. Like, that's the goal, of course. But also, on top of it, but that's really not the goal. The goal is to honestly, the best way, I really like feedback. So like DMing feedback or emailing feedback. You can find all my contact info at therealgwen.com. It's helpful, specific to the podcast and specific to guests. So sending me recommendations for people that you want to hear from and hear me interview. Especially if you notice that I follow the person on Instagram or they follow me, that makes things easier too. So, anyone that you've, seen me interact with in any way that I could interview, supporting me there, and of course supporting my income through OnlyFans, which is my primary source right now, is incredibly helpful. But more than anything, subscribing to OnlyFans, following on Insta, and following on Spotify as well.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Passion Pod. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. We'll see you soon.